Hey, welcome to the Articulate Ox podcast, where artists talk about the art that made them artistic. I am your host, Soma79. Thank you once again for joining me. My guest today is singer-songwriter Jason Temple. I've known Jason for a really long time, longer than I probably even care to admit, but he's super talented. We're talking today about the Sundays, which is a kind of an alternative rock band from the early 90s from Britain. And they're a group who I was always familiar with, but didn't really know their music. When I went and listened to it, I realized that some of the songs were familiar to me and I knew them. They kind of have sort of a Cranberries-esque vibe. I believe those two groups were compared a lot back in the day, but what do I know? Because I didn't really know that much about them. But Jason and I have a great conversation here. We talk about our own approaches to making music. We talk a little bit about a project that we're working on together with our man Dan Bizzoli. That project seems to be called Microwave Sushi, so keep your ears peeled for that. There may be something coming out later this year, we shall see. But yeah, so I hope you enjoy the conversation with Jason. I'll talk to you. Peace. Hey, welcome to episode 14 of the Articulate Ox podcast with my guest today, Jason Temple. I have known Jason for a long time, and we're going to talk about one of his favorite groups, the Sundays, and we're also going to talk about his album, Jason Temple, Postcards and Ephemera, which came out in 2022, correct?
Yes, after a long process, yes.
Cool, we'll talk about all that. And I believe
Sure.
at the time of when this will be released, this album will be available on streaming services. You still have vinyl available and all that good stuff.
Yep.
So excellent. Well, what's going on today, man? How you doing?
Pretty good. Just happy to sit down and talk with you because, yeah, I love this podcast and the idea behind it. So,
oh man, I
great
appreciate
to talk
it.
to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on here. So let's talk a little bit about the Sundays. They're one of those bands that I definitely, when I was younger, I saw their album covers all over the place. I saw their name all over the place, and I heard other people talking about them. But until I went back and listened to one or two of their albums, I don't think I'd ever heard one of their songs before. And I was pretty blown away. I mean, they're pretty awesome. They're a UK group, and sort of, I said before we started, sort of Cranberries-esque for people who haven't heard them.
Sure.
Though they probably predated the Cranberries by a little bit. So talk a little bit about your introduction to them and how they inspired you.
Yeah, so like a lot of bands and people with older siblings, they were introduced to me by my brother. He introduced me to my older brother, and he introduced me to a lot of bands that I still adore. And yeah, the Sundays were just kind of like the thing that got to me with them was the layered textured guitar playing that Dave Gavrorin, their guitar player, does. It's kind of I was a big U2 fan and still am, but growing up, and it kind of seemed like an extension of what the Edge was doing. A lot of those, intricate crossing lines and, chorusy, delayed effects that I love. It just gives it more space. And when you're the only guitar player in a band, it kind of helps fill that space to have some of those things. And Harriet Wheeler's singing is perfect for that kind of thing. It's very ethereal and kind of flowery, if you will. But yeah, they just were a huge influence on my guitar playing. When I first started playing guitar, I came up in the age of hair metal, like a lot of people. So, that stuff was fun to watch because technically it was, amazing guitar playing, but it really wasn't what I was aiming for. So I feel like the Sundays.
Oh,
no, go ahead.
I think for people who weren't around back then, the difference, like hair metal just sort of died overnight when groups like Nirvana and I think there's a certain aspect of MTV that started pushing that sort of music really just took it over. And I don't think I've ever seen anything die that quickly in pop culture since then.
Yeah.
It's just, and a lot of it has come back. I mean, there was sort of that era where it's like, okay, we're getting rid of the rap of the 80s, no more like Kid and Play and Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince, and we're getting rid of all the rock of the 80s, and we're gonna proclaim they'll never be back, though all of them, they live on again today. I go back, I was listening to Def Leppard the other day, and I was loving it.
Yeah, I mean, again, I got no shame. I still listen to some of that stuff, and Def Leppard's a perfect example. Like they definitely are in that genre, but again, going back to guitar, the things they were doing guitar wise is kind of in that same vein where there's a lot of different parts going on. It fills the sound. It's not just
Right.
really fast shredding, if you will. So Def Leppard's a band out of that era I definitely appreciate for that. But yeah, so the Sundays were just yeah, kind of the antithesis of that, and really were in my wheelhouse. Of I was like, oh, that's kind of the guitar playing I want to do,
Yeah.
and yeah, that was right around when I started kind of writing my own stuff when I got introduced to them.
Yeah. So
So,
when did you start actually playing?
so I was probably seriously, I actually started on drums because my dad was a drummer my whole, life growing up. I was like his de facto roadie. I was like a 10-year-old kid in these bars, like helping him set up his drums because he played in cover bands and stuff. So
That's awesome.
he had a drum kit in the basement when I was a kid. So I would just bang around on that. But then my brother, again, he played guitar, and that was a huge influence on me. And guitar was just a little more portable, if you will, than drums. And you could play it anywhere, especially if it's an acoustic. Um, so yeah, I was probably about 13 when I was, you know, really starting to just exclusively play the guitar. And um, for better or worse, I never took lessons.
Same here.
So
Yeah. My brother taught me one Ramon song, I think, and everything
all
was
right,
built off of that. It was like, okay, this is Blitzkrieg Bop, and I'm like, all right, I can take it from here.
yeah, my first song I remember learning was "Dirty Water."
Yes, that's a good
Um,
one. Yeah,
yeah, my dad showed me how to play, and growing up around Boston, I think it's kind of appropriate. That was the one to learn
yeah.
first.
Smoke on the Water is usually not very far behind that either. That's
Yeah,
usually
yeah,
one of the other big ones people learn
yeah,
first. And then,
yep.
so what
But
do you
yeah,
remember what your
so
first guitar was?
I do. So I kind of was gifted a West Tone, which was kind of like a I don't know if they sold them in Sears, but I think they were like a department store guitar brand.
I have one of
And
those. Not one of
yeah,
those, but I have a guitar. Yeah, I have a similar
yeah.
story. Go on with yours first.
But yeah, and had a hand-me-down amp. I still don't remember I got that amp. And then eventually, like I got my first quote unquote real guitar, um, and a real amp, like a couple of years later. And I still kind of wish I had that West Tone. My dad wound up giving it away to someone when
Oh,
I was living with my mom, and I was kind of bummed about that. But you know,
it's
hopefully
funny.
they got enjoyment out of it.
Yeah, my first guitar was a three-quarter bass that somebody from our high school that was 2 years older than us, we'll call him Jeff G. He he I guess his father had bought him a bass. Basically, it was a rock axe, and the thing weighs, I still have it, it weighs way more than any other guitar I've ever had.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and the little amp had all this fuzz on the side, and I
Oh,
used it to
wow.
play on a bunch of my. I mean, I really should take it in to get it fixed up because it's probably not. I think right now it won't even if I plug it in. Like there's a problem with electric components, but I still use the thing. I used it for years, and it sounds pretty
Oh, yeah.
good. You know, I mean,
Well, even the cheap guitars from back then were made really well, I feel like.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's a great place by you in your neck of the woods if you need a place to get it fixed called Mill River.
Okay.
Uh,
I don't
they're
see. I've had a
fantastic.
few of my places, few of my things fixed at a different place. So I wish I could remember what they were called. They're right in downtown Northampton.
Oh,
Last time I
downtown
was in
towns
there,
probably.
yes, yeah. Last time I
Yeah,
was in there, it's a classic story of living in Western Mass. They're like, Jay Mascis was just here. You just missed
yeah,
him. It's
yep.
like everybody has a bumping into Jay Mascis story
Oh,
around
of
here,
course,
except
yeah.
for me. When I lived in Boston, as everybody had bumping into Aerosmith story. I have two of those, but I don't have any Jay
Oh, wow.
Mascis stories yet. All
Well,
I can
it'll
say is
happen.
Steven Tyler is a lot shorter than I thought he'd be.
Yeah, that's usually how that goes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, when I was first living in Western Mass, I was talking to my buddy in Portland, and I said, "I think I saw Jay Mascis in Newbury Comics," and he just said, "You saw Jay Mascis." Like, he's like, "There's no mistaking him for anyone else." So,
Yeah. There's a photo out here of some car dealership. A friend of mine showed it to me that he had bought a car from a few years ago, and they took a picture of him with a salesman in the car, and he looks as nonplussed as you could possibly look.
that sounds
I think
right.
they post it like every year. It's hilarious.
Nice.
Yeah, I know. But so we were they're one of those groups that either you know them as being an absolute classic legendary group or you don't know them at all. I found like
Yeah.
I trying to explain to someone who Dinosaur Jr. is. I'm like, how do you not know who Dinosaur Jr.? I'm like, you gonna tell me you don't know who the Lemonheads are either?
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess growing up in Massachusetts, we're a little more privy to some of those bands because they're from here, but, yeah, I mean, he's legendary for sure. I mean, he's got numerous signature guitars now and pedals, so
Yeah, the documentary that came out. They did a documentary that they showed at the theater here in Amherst. So I actually had tickets. I was supposed to go see them, and they were supposed to be there presenting it. But I don't know. I think I might have got sick. I don't forget what happened, but I ended up having to
yeah.
miss it. Or maybe I was out of town or something. But would have been great.
Oh, by the way, that makes me this is a total non sequitur, but it goes back because I
What are you here
listened to
for?
your pod with Leah Donahue, and you were talking about Tycho.
Yes.
Um, Next time you're at Amherst Cinema and you're waiting for the previews, the music they play is Tycho.
Oh, is it? Oh
Yeah.
shit.
So
Wow. I
I
damn, wish I knew that. I have to go back. That's a great cinema. That I just
oh
saw.
yeah.
I had never seen this movie before. It was a Dennis Hopper movie called was it Out of the Blue. It was a line from the Neil Young song. It was Out of the Blue, I think.
Oh, okay.
And it hadn't been. I think it's not really available. There's a lot of music in it that I think would be really tough to probably get cleared on. But
Sure.
the young woman in the movie was, I don't know how old she was. She was playing underage, and I think she might have been 16 or 17. It was one of the best performances by a young person I've ever seen in
Huh.
my life. It was amazing. I can't recommend it enough. And she went out, she didn't even go on to do that much. I think she was sort of one of those people who just kind of aged out of it, but I highly recommend checking out that movie. And I saw Fire Walk with Me, the Twin Peaks movie. I'm
Oh,
wearing my
nice.
Twin Peaks ring today, so
Nice.
if I disappear, I don't know why. Um, I got actually my Twin Peaks and Simpsons mug here, so
Yeah, that's a good combo.
let's talk some Twin Peaks. So it's funny you mentioned the scene back then. I don't think I realized that I was older how fortunate we were to have so many of these groups in our backyard, like Dinosaur Jr., the Lemonheads,
Sure.
Letters to Cleo,
Yeah.
insert other
Julian
band name. Yeah,
Hatfield.
there you go, Julian Hatfield. A bunch of others. And obviously Berkeley was there. See, for me as a kid, Boston might we grew up around the Hopkinton area, so where the Boston Marathon starts. It's 26.2 miles away from Boston, but for me, it might
Yeah.
as well have been 26,000 miles because I
Oh,
think
sure.
I went to the Science Museum maybe once as a kid.
The
I
aquarium.
Yep, I don't even know if I went there until I was an adult.
Yeah.
I remember I went to Boston University, so then it was like I was going there all the time. But I never had gone to any of those shows in Cambridge. Did you ever get to go into Boston to see any shows when you were in high school?
Not really. I didn't start going to shows till right out of high school, which I regret because, like one person that I just absolutely adore the music and he's no longer with us is Jeff Buckley, and he played a ton around there when we were in high school. I would have loved to
Yeah.
seen, or Morphine is another Boston band
Yes.
that I love that
Man, they
I
don't get
never got
talked
to
about
see.
much anymore.
Oh, I love that band, and I just never got to see them in their heyday. And they were from Cambridge. They played like Middle East and all that all the time. So that would have been great to see them. But yeah, I didn't really start going to shows till right out of high school, but I made up for it after that. I was going constantly and into Boston a lot to see a lot of local bands.
I wasn't sure. See, I remember the first show I ever went to was Smashing Pumpkins at the Wallace Civic Center on the Siamese Dream
Oh
tour.
wow.
You weren't at that one? I remember there was a lot of
Nah.
people from everybody's wearing those t-shirts afterwards. I actually still have my t-shirt from that show and it never
Oh
fit
nice.
me right. And I recently Googled what it goes for on eBay and then I felt like I could get some extra cheese on my Whopper. So that thing
Oh
might be
sure.
coming up for sale pretty soon if
Yeah,
somebody
yeah.
wants to overpay for my barely
Yeah.
worn Smashing Pumpkin shirt. I'm gonna slide my advertisements in the
Sure.
podcast.
Get that money.
It's the purple one. Google it.
Yeah,
um,
yeah. The only time I saw the Pumpkins was on Lollapalooza. The year they were on Lollapalooza, I think it was the third Lollapalooza with the Beasties and Tropical Quest.
I wish I'd seen that show.
That was a great show.
Yeah. The only
Luscious
Lollapalooza
Jackson
I
was there
went
too.
to was Metallica, Rancid, Ramones,
Oh,
Soundgarden. Not really. Yeah, I was a huge Rancid fan. I loved the Ramones, Soundgarden, Metallica. I can kind of take or leave, but it wasn't a very Lollapalooza feeling show.
yeah,
But
sure.
yeah, it was still dope.
Actually, you bring up Rancid, so you were an Operation Ivy fan?
What's funny is I don't really. I went down a Google rabbit hole on them recently. I had totally forgot that Tim Armstrong was from Operation Ivy. And I think it's
Oh
just because my
yeah,
brain just sort of has been into Rancid for so long. And I went back and listened to all their stuff again. And I wasn't back then. Like I was one of those albums that I saw but never heard. But now I'm like, how did I miss this?
well, see, I learned of them from skate videos. So back then I was a skater, and they did an H Street video, and the whole thing was Operation Ivy music. So that's how I found out who they were. And yeah, I was hooked
It's
from
funny
then
how
on.
many people cite skate videos as the way they're introduced to music.
Oh yeah,
I saw Archers of Loaf a few years ago, and I brought some friends, and they're like, "Yeah, I don't know anything about them except for one song and a skate video when I was a kid."
right.
And it's like I think the higher level of that, or the bigger level of that, is the Tony Hawk skateboarding games. Like I
Oh
can
yeah,
still
yeah,
hear the Goldfinger song from that in my head, like
right,
probably more so than that other song that by them that I can't remember at all.
right.
But that stuff really got music out there, and what I was
Oh
mentioning
sure.
before about that time when hair metal went, kind of switching to alternative. At that point, there was almost like Coke and Pepsi. There were two brands of rock music. There was the hair metal,
Right.
and then there was, which was like the Guns N' Roses, and I guess Metallica wasn't really hair metal, but they were the metal part, and then there was the REMs and the U2s
Right.
and the Weezers and all that stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
And now it feels like I was going through an OCD moment recently where I was making little tabs for all my records so I could put them in different categories.
Oh sure.
And I spent forever. I was like, wait a minute, the Sonic Youth belong in punk or do they belong in modern rock? And you're
Right,
just
right.
like, you can't even classify stuff anymore.
Yeah.
Which is, I guess,
Which isn't a bad thing, I guess.
no, not at all, not at
But let
all.
it all blend together.
Yeah. So you had a band back in the day, and when we were talking before, and you mentioned the name Nimmer, that definitely set off something in my head. I was like, "Oh my god, I remember that," and I never would
Yeah.
have thought of that. It was like Nimmer and Stella Blue was the other band from back around then with my friends Matt and Jack and Jason Milo and all them.
Oh, okay.
So take me through Nimmer. How'd that get going?
So that was kind of an accident for me. So Nimmer existed before I joined them. It was my brother and a couple other guys, and their bass player moved. I think he moved to California or something. So I offered just to so they could keep playing because they were getting ready to start gigging. I said, "Well, if you want to keep practicing, I'll just sit in on bass at your practices until you find someone." Well, then like 3 years went by, and I was still just sitting in,
Yeah,
quote unquote. But it was a lot of fun. I mean, it was a our drummer wrote most of the songs, and they were super catchy, power pop, very Weezer-esque. And at that time, that stuff was really like pretty big. There was another local Boston band called Waltham that was kind of big at the time, and our other friend's band, the Shield of Vine, was really big at the time, and they still kind of are around Boston. So we just, yeah, we would gig around Boston, Bill's Bar, and the Middle East, TT's, and it was a lot of fun. I'm not a bass player by trade, but it was a good time, and
if you can play
I
guitar,
love,
you can play a little bass.
yeah,
That's
and I love just playing in front of people. That's always been the highlight for me when it comes to music. So just getting to do that, on a regular basis was, that's the best practice. You can rehearse all you want, but until you do it in front of people at a regular clip, um, it's just not the same because you got to adjust to things. Like one gig, our drummer forgot his cymbal bag,
yeah.
so we had to do the first set for like a handful of people like acoustically while he went back to the rehearsal space to get his cymbals. So
Yeah.
stuff
The
like
funny
that
thing
you
about
can't really
playing
prepare
live
for.
is that I found is that there are things that you show up at the gig and something isn't going right, and there are things that nobody will ever notice except for you guys that are performing, and
Right,
then there are things that everybody notices that you're totally unaware of, like a microphone
right,
not sounding right, and that's what
right.
really you should be worried about.
Yeah,
'Cause I've definitely what you just said. I mean, I've only ever played an instrument on stage, like in high school, like battle of bands, but I've rapped on
sure.
stage, maybe scratch a little bit sometimes, and it's just
Yeah, yeah.
so many things can go wrong.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's, for have a whole room full of people, if you're lucky, looking at you while it happens, it's not always fun.
Well, and that was the thing, like, my brother was very self-critical when it came to his playing. He's a great guitar player, great background singer. Um, but yeah, he would have one little mess up during the show that 99.9% of the
Right.
people didn't even notice, but he knew it, and he could never get past it. It would just bother him the rest of the show. And we try to tell him, like, "Look, man, just move past it and just keep playing. It's fine,
Yeah.
you know?"
Yeah. 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 It would be nice if people were paying that close of attention to notice those sort of
Yeah,
things. But,
exactly.
you know, you mentioned performing at places like the Middle East and Bills and TT's.
Mhm.
I got a chance to perform in the Middle East a couple times, and that was for myself. I never performed with the other two, but it was after years of watching it, being
Oh, yeah.
there. Do you remember your first time playing in a venue that you had been to as a observer and what that felt like?
Yeah, I mean, that would probably be, the Bills gig, because
That was a
not long
great
before.
spot. That
Oh,
that was
yeah.
it was right on Lansdowne, for those who don't know. It's not it's been gone for a while, right?
No, but I think they're bringing it back.
I
I
keep
just
hearing that, yeah.
But I don't know if it's the same location. It's probably just the name they're using again because it's
Right.
recognizable.
And it was right
But,
near where Tequila I don't know if Tequila Rain is. I don't even know what's still down there, but it was down across from Fenway at Lansdowne, so
yeah,
you
it's
can
right near
find the place that doesn't
Axis
exist anymore. Axis
and
was one of my favorite places, yeah.
Avalon, yeah. Actually, the Sundays, the one time I saw the Sundays was at Avalon. It was wound up being their last tour. But,
Wow.
but yeah, we played at Bill's, and we weren't the headliner. We were opening for that band I mentioned before, Walt Band, but the place was packed. And,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I'd been going to shows there for years at that point. I don't know if you remember Groove It's Malt, but,
Yes.
they
Yes.
were a fantastic band. And we used to go see them there all the time. They played at Bill's constantly. So yeah, to play on that stage was just really cool. And TT's too, when we played TT's eventually. I'd seen a bunch of shows there, and Middle East as well. I hadn't been to the Middle East as much, but still I knew the significance of it, especially in the Boston scene. So
Yeah.
that was cool.
There was a
Play those
big,
venues.
I don't wanna say prick waving thing going on, but when it came to the Middle East, but at least in the hip hop scene there was, where it was like, "Okay, you played the Middle East, but did you play upstairs or downstairs?
Right, right.
Oh, you
Or the
played
corner.
downstairs, but when did you go on?" And it was just like
Right.
that was like the thing of like, did you play and then it was like, did you ever get to go in the back room at the Middle East? You know?
Right.
And then it's funny how, like, even in musicians get so competitive,
Oh,
especially
sure.
if you're headlining, you don't, but if you're on the opening act, then it's like everybody's just like,
Right.
what,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but it's still though, I remember the first time they gave me a performer's wristband at the Middle East, and I was up on stage downstairs, and I was just like, this is
Wow.
it was just I was, I think it was the only time I ever did. I didn't get to rap, I was just scratching, but it was still just one of those
Still
feelings.
though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they recorded albums here, and all my
Actually, no, I was just gonna say, thinking of the Middle East and scratching, I saw a legendary show there with Rozelle and the Executioners.
God.
Yeah, that was pretty amazing.
It's funny, much of the Executioners, there's a coffee shop in downtown Northampton. I'll give them a quick shout out, The Roost. And actually, I don't even know if I should, because if this person wants to be outed, but I was in there. There was an opening act for the Executioners a few years ago. This is many years ago, actually, called Northern State. And they're kind
Oh,
of like
yes, I know Northern State.
the female Beastie Boys. So I used to
Yep.
do they got a really good review in Rolling Stone, like a 5-star review of like their demo in the early 2000s. And I was like, who are these people? So I looked them up, and I kind of became friends with one of the members who I haven't talked to in years. And then I was in the Roost one day, and the person running it, I'm like, that looks like one of the women from Northern State. That's got to be a
Sure, yep.
coincidence. Then I see her on the news, and I'm like, I think that's her. And I went in there the other day. I'm like, are you? And she was like pretty surprised to be recognized,
Yeah, I
but I
bet she
think I might
was.
have made her day. And I don't want to be
I
like,
know
oh,
she
I
was
had a
shocked
major
when I
crush on.
recognized her.
Yeah. Well, did you recognize it too?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Oh, really? Oh, good. So
Yeah.
it wasn't that's funny. Yeah, I wanted to be like, I had a crush on you back in the day, but I didn't think it was appropriate.
Yeah.
But we used to, I remember they opened with the Executioners, and we got to go. They used to drive around in a Winnebago, and we got to like go and smoke weed with them in the Winnebago
Oh,
like after
nice.
the show. That was like the highlight of my existence back then.
Yeah, I met her, because I don't know if they still do at the Roost, they do karaoke there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah, and that's how I met her, through a mutual friend who was good friends with her, and I was like, "Wait, she's in Northern State, right?" And they're like,
Yeah.
"You know who that is?" I was like, "Yeah, I saw them a couple of times." So,
The member that I knew, Hester Prynne from Northern State a
yeah.
little more than the others, and there was one day, it was maybe 5 or 6 years after I'd even, like, talked to her or whatever, and I saw her on a soy milk ad. I
Oh,
was
really?
I'm like, I emailed her, I'm like, "Is that you?" And she's like, "Yep, that's me." And she was just
Nice.
playing at she's a DJ now. I think she does a lot of work with Spotify. She just did a show at the Jane Club in LA, which is I don't know. They're an organization that I think is run by June Diane Rayfield and some other
Oh,
people. And
okay.
it's
Yep.
sort of to empower women in many different ways. And so it's simply a great combination of doing it together. So I was so happy to see that them still around. Of course, I asked Sprout if she was still working on music, and she said that, mostly with her kids, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll get her on. Just wants me on a track someday.
Yeah,
But I
get on a track.
they were a big influence for me too, because this is a little off subject, but I started doing my rapping in the early 2000s, and there weren't a whole lot of people that looked like me. And it was like you could
Right.
say, well, everybody saw 8 Mile and decided they could be a white rapper.
No, right,
But
right,
for
right.
me, it was like I saw people like the Beastie Boys, and then someone like Northern State, and I was like, oh, that's sort of it gave me inspiration to get up
Sure.
there. So,
Well, and I
so
know you're kind of, friendly with Esoteric, so I'm sure he was a big influence too.
he was I mean, he's a huge influence. He's just it's one of those, and it's funny. Like I don't really I'd say we're friendly. I wouldn't go so far as step over the line and call us friends, but I'm always
Right.
surprised whenever I see him somewhere and he recognized me. But I went to like every one of their shows, and they were a group that I just saw that last night they played in Copenhagen on the
Oh,
Czarface
yeah.
tour. And I used to see them at, remember the Living Room in Rhode Island?
Yep.
That place should have been condemned. I don't know what's
Oh,
there
yeah.
now, but it was like you could literally be at the urinal and still watching the show.
Yep.
And I used to go see them there. I saw them play at the BU basement a bunch of times, and I mean,
Nice.
just yeah, it's a
They
big
were great.
influence. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And actually played out here recently, and he's on my. I got a song with him and Cool Keith on my album, so
Oh,
I'm
nice.
excited about that. I'll have to send you a
Yeah,
link to it so you can check it out, because the album's not been around for a
absolutely.
while, but I'm excited to get feedback. So let's talk a little more about you here. So
Yeah.
how long did Nimmer last?
Uh, in the in that iteration, with me in the band, I'd say about 3 years, and then, we kinda stopped gigging, but we were still rehearsing, and like I said before, like, playing live for me is the thing. I'm not gonna rehearse a bunch if we're not playing shows. It just,
Right.
it'd be one thing if I didn't have a day job, but, trying to balance both without the payoff of playing shows. Not that it was a literal payoff. We made like no money, but
Yeah.
that was fine with me. I wasn't trying to make money doing that. I just
Someone
wanted to
handed me
play.
$20 after a gig once, and I was almost felt embarrassed to take it.
Oh
I'm
yeah,
like, wait a minute, you're giving me any money?
right. I mean, not that artists shouldn't be paid, but
Right.
you know, again, that wasn't what I was in it for. So yeah, after I kind of stepped away from the band, they just kind of stopped. We had recorded two like EPs worth of demos, which still, I mean, I can say this because I didn't do the actual recording, but they sound great. Like, um, we'll probably talk about it when we talk about my record, but recording to tape, which we did those demos, because our singer had a 16 track reel to reel that we recorded our demos
Yeah.
to. And I listened to those still, and we never even got them mastered, and they still sound great. So I don't know if he even has the tapes. I'd love to get a hold of the tapes and get them mastered properly and press the vinyl because I think they'd sound amazing. But
Yeah, it's funny you said that,
maybe,
because like I recently, Stella Blue, like I mentioned before, my friend Matt
yeah,
is a good friend of mine, and those guys, I found their old tapes recently, and I dumped them down and sent them to Matt, who was the guitarist, and he was like playing for his kids, and I was like, these sound pretty good. Like it was a little bit of,
yeah,
I didn't do the work that somebody professional would do to them, but a little bit of work that could
right.
sound really good. And I was like,
Oh
maybe I
yeah,
could sample this.
Yeah, if you have the original tape too, especially, you can do all sorts of stuff with it. So
Yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned the recording the tape because I was looking at the insert on your album before. There was a picture of what looked like a reel to reel. Did
yeah,
was this album recorded to tape or was
yeah, absolutely.
wow in 2020 something? That's awesome.
2020, yeah. So one of the reasons I chose Wachusett, which is where I recorded it, is because they have a tape machine. So this album was kind of a, I guess, passion project for me. It was in the works for a long time. Um, the the kind of genesis of it started when I was living in Arizona. I lived out there for 8 years, um, and I wanted to. There were a couple reasons I wanted to record the tape, and even when I was living in Arizona, I was gonna record it here in Massachusetts because I wanted people I knew to play on it,
Mhm.
um, like Leah and my friend Nick. Shout out to Nick Chisholm, that guy's a great guitar player. But I couldn't get it done when I was in Arizona. The logistics were just, it was going to be too much. So when I moved back here, um, I made that kind of a priority. And so I looked for studios that had tape machines because one of the reasons I wanted to record tape is I can get a little in my own head when I'm home recording because I know there's like infinite tracks,
Right.
infinite ways I can manipulate it. And you can still do editing and stuff on tape, but I mean, tape itself costs money. The time in the studio costs money. So I wanted to force myself to kind of just like make quick decisions, make like good decisions, but not like belabor every little
Yeah.
thing.
Funny you
And
mentioned
Mike,
that. There was a song on my old album that I recorded it on a we'll just say a feel good pill. And
yeah,
I
sure,
literally the next day I looked back and I recorded this one line over 100 times. I just
wow.
kept and like I probably used take three. I don't even, but I was just like, ooh, that's kind of embarrassing. Like I'm like, I don't feel like Brian Wilson or anything. I just feel like some like head case trying to get something out,
Right.
but you know. But
Yeah,
yeah, so you're saying.
but yeah. So Mike, the engineer and the owner of the studio, he was thrilled when I told him I wanted to use tape because his first words were like, "Wait, I don't have to look at a computer screen for the whole session." I was like, "Yeah, man." Like, and no one ever uses the tape machine, which has some downfalls because they're harder to maintain when they're not used as much.
Yeah.
Because I don't know that anyone's making new reel-to-reel tape machines. All the ones you see
Right.
in studios now are vintage that have to be, have serious upkeep.
It's like VCRs.
Um,
You can't even get the parts to make a new VCR
right.
anymore.
So we did have a couple of days we lost because of some ghosts in the machine, but he was great about it. He was. The other thing is we made this record in the middle of the pandemic. So I started recording March 9th of 2020, and like literally like a week later, the
March
world shut
9th,
down.
RIP Biggie. Sorry.
Yeah. So we had like, I don't think people were allowed back in like spaces like that till like that July.
Oh,
And,
wow.
and you had to be masked up even if you were. So that was one of the benefits of it, mostly just being he and I. We could mask up and, mostly I was in the kind of playroom while he's in the monitoring room with the desk and the tape
Right.
machine. So we were separated most of the time, anyways. Um, and then the few, when Leah would come in or my buddy Nick, they were they did all their stuff in one day each. I mean, total time the album only took 2, maybe 3 weeks to record, but because of all the time we had to spend away,
Right. Right.
um, it, it we finished mixing it on Halloween, that following Halloween. So,
So of 2020 or
yeah.
2021? Oh, okay.
So total, it was like 7 months
Oh,
of time, but in actual time spent recording and mixing, it was like 3 weeks.
yeah. And
So
that's like, I mean, as I'm here shooting, I'm working on a movie for it to go along with my new album. And it's like I
right,
could spend 7 hours working on it and the camera's only rolling for about 7 minutes. So it's like there is a little bit that of the entire, it's like everything takes way longer than you think. And when you're in a recording
oh yeah,
studio and you're like, okay, that buzz that my guitar makes usually isn't a big deal when I'm in my living room, but now that it's being
right,
recorded to expensive tape and that we had to like fix the
right,
machine and rent a studio, it's like suddenly that's a big deal, you know? Like, have you ever seen 24-hour party people where they have to get
yeah,
something done
right,
immediately and they pull the
yeah,
entire drum set apart?
yeah.
That's so common.
Oh, sure. And that's the other benefit about recording in like a quote unquote professional studio is when I record at home, I have to do everything myself, like turn knobs and faders and stuff like that. All I had to do was play, when I was recording that record. It was just be in the room and play. He was taking care of all the technical stuff, and he was great, with the miking and all that stuff. And I really appreciate that stuff. I kind of
Yeah.
kick myself for not going to school for that kind of thing because I think it would be a great, even for my own knowledge, but even to make a career out of it would have been cool.
Yeah. I know
So
to
I'm
that
glad he
point,
does that.
I studied film at BU, and
Right.
I've done very little work in film since then. But I would say the lessons I learned at BU, the degree has helped me get jobs, but the stuff I actually learned there has helped me in my quote unquote hobby or artistic life
Sure.
so much. And just if you can edit, back then we were literally cutting film with scissors or
Right.
something and like keeping it together. If you can do that, you can do, Pro Tools is like once you get over all
Oh
the error
yeah.
messages, you're all good.
Right. Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
funny.
Logic is so
I
easy compared
yeah.
to that stuff.
Whenever I watch movies from like the 90s now, and they're all shot on film, and you can see that obviously film looks different than digital. It always blows my mind. I'm like, and I'm watching like the pallbearer with what's David Schwimmer. And
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, they actually paid to shoot this on film, and
Right.
like they don't shoot anything on film now. And there because it does have that warm feeling that it almost makes something look more artistic just because it's on film. And maybe
Oh
that's
sure.
just my retro brain going, but like with music,
Well,
I definitely when I saw the reel to reel on that, I was like, oh, that's why this, it may just be in my head, but I'm like, that's why this album feels so warm and lush and things like
well, yeah. I mean, there is physical things about tape, and I'm sure it's similar with film. That I mean, there's a certain level of like compression and saturation that happens with tape that now the digital plugins are so close.
that. Right.
I mean, a lot of people thought I did it to tape because I'm like a purist, analog purist or whatever. And I appreciate analog, but that wasn't the main reason I was doing it. I knew I was going to get pressed to vinyl, so yeah, I wanted it on tape for that. But it was more about, like I said, like just being forced to make quick decisions and not linger too long on certain things. Um, and because it was my first time in a professional recording studio, I was like, I want to see if I can do this like they used to do it. It was kind of a challenge in that way too. See if I could do it. So,
Yeah, because that's how
you
you
know,
know you're actually more of a master of your craft. I'll be the first to admit that that situation for me sounds terrifying. For because like I know it's very rare for me to go into a recording session with everything done. Like if I'm going in with 75% of what, like I usually leave about 25% for the day, like
right.
to figure out on the day. And you can't, I've recorded in a real studio at the very beginning of my career in Boston because actually my guest Upgrade, who's going to be on, who would have already been aired, he was working at one of the bigger studios in Boston, so we had
Oh,
a
okay.
lot of good opportunities to go in there, and he really knew what he was doing, and it was great. But it was terrifying. Like your mistakes are amplified so
Yeah.
much, and there's a room full of people, and but the benefit of it though is the objectivity, and that's something that for me, I've learned as I've got older, not only is it hard to be objective about your own music, but your own ears will lie to you after about an
Right.
hour of recording. You're not hearing what you think you're hearing because, for lack of a better
Yeah.
term, you're damaging your ears.
Sure.
What was that like? Did it help to you to have somebody objective in the room?
Yeah. And that was another reason I wanted to do it and, not just do it all myself in my home studio is because you do like a lot of musicians, we fall into patterns. Um, it was, I wanted someone to be like, yeah, maybe try this instead, just because I'm not precious about it. Like,
Right.
um, I love collaborating. Like, I much prefer to collaborate than do everything to myself.
I've learned that about myself as well too.
Yeah, it's just more fun to bounce ideas off of people and, get a different perspective, especially on anything you're doing. So that was great to have someone, and it helps that he's a musician as well. He's not just an engineer. Like, he plays upright. He played all the drums on the record, which he did in like a day and a half, which was awesome.
I'd still be
Um,
figuring out which way to hold the sticks. I'm
yeah,
a terrible drummer. Drumming to me
yeah.
is
I
like
mean,
skiing, where like if I and I don't ski, but like when you get up for like the first time I got up in skis for like 30 seconds, I was like so in my head, I felt
right,
instantly over. And when I'm playing drums, in a second I get in the groove, I get in my head about it, and then that's
right,
over.
yeah. Drums is, again, like my dad was a drummer, so I always have a great affinity for drummers. But yeah, I don't know. Even if I could play the drums well enough to do them myself, I don't know that I would have. Just
Yeah.
because, especially recording like that with tape, that's the only time I had to press any buttons is when he was recording the drums. I just had to hit press and play and stop and rewind the tape. But yeah, he was great
It's funny you
to
mentioned
work
that
with.
because you and myself and this other person, Dan Mazzoli, who we know from back in the
Yep.
day, have been sort of working on a couple things ourselves. Like Dan, he actually sent me some new stuff yesterday. I was going to talk to you
Okay.
about. We talked about maybe the three of
Yep.
us jamming together in person at some point soon if you're
Sure.
down. I floated the idea around of calling ourselves Microwave Sushi, so you can let me know later if you like that or not. But
Like,
like he sent me he just sent me some clips of him recording on his iPhone, and I just looped them and turned them into beats and sent them to you. And you dumped down some great guitar stuff, and I put a little bit of bass on it, and all of a sudden you kind of got something.
right.
But I'm still working the lyrics and stuff, but like to get ourselves in the own room, we can actually work off each other. I think would be really cool.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Um, that is, I will say that is the beauty of all this kind of digital recording now. It's so much easier to collaborate, even if you're thousands of miles away.
Yeah,
Like you and I did, like I have a buddy in Arizona. I still collaborate with, he's a great singer songwriter. Um, and he'll send me like him singing and playing acoustic to like a click track. And then I arrange like drums, more guitars, bass, everything around it. And I did the same with Leah actually on some of her songs. And it's, you know, now that I'm back in Massachusetts, I can collaborate with her or you in person. But I do like that about all this digital recording capabilities that allows you to do that.
yeah. Speaking
So
of
that
Leah,
is,
so there was a few songs at the end of her episode of this podcast. I
yep,
think you were on at least one of those, right? There was
yeah,
one called
yeah,
FAR. Is that Yep.
feel all right. Yeah, that's the one that I played on, and yeah, we did like three or four songs like that. And again, I love collaborating, and she's obviously a great musician in her own right. So I
She
loved what
is.
she did on my record with the keys and the backing vocals.
Yeah. Let's talk a
Um,
little more about your album, actually. So
yeah,
I've obviously have the vinyl. I've heard this a couple
yeah, yeah.
times. Listened to it
Thank you.
again yesterday. Really enjoyed it. I one thing I was trying to think of. It's always tough to do the comparisons, but like I just for the sake of people listening, and you can tell me if this is fair or not. It felt to me like a more of an electrified Jayhawks to some degree, if you're familiar with them.
Sure. Yeah,
And
there's kind of an alt country vibe to
yep,
it.
yep.
Yeah.
And the lyrics felt for some reason I kept thinking of Cream. I don't know why, but that seemed to be the lyrics that
Oh,
like it, and like I really dug it. Like it's and those are bands
thanks.
that I love, and your playing on this is really excellent.
Thank
Um
you.
what so we talked a little bit about the recording process here, but how about the songwriting process? How long have some of these songs been around for? What do you got to say
Yeah.
about that?
So that's kind of a mixture of songs that are literally like almost decades old, and some are that were like I wrote while we were recording. So all the music was pretty set as far as like what I wanted to record musically, but a lot of songs never had lyrics. Um, so I kind of it worked out in a way because I this was right after George Floyd, and a lot of that stuff was happening,
Yeah, I could feel a little bit of
which
that coming through.
which was terrible, obviously,
Yeah.
but it gave me, definitely inspiration to write. There's a song on there called "While They Were Marching" that has elements of that. But then there's a song like the first song, "Anyone for Tea," which is a political song as well. That actually came about, you know, at that point 10 years earlier. A lot of the ideas of that song, unfortunately, they still ring true.
I'm going to say that's a yeah. There's a song on my
Uh,
album where I talk about a little bit of like the that same stuff, and I played it for someone. They're like, "You better get that out quickly, or it's not going to be relevant." I'm like, "Oh, honey,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
I
yeah,
wish
yeah,
that was the problem."
yeah, right. And then like the song "Rows of Aspen Trees," that's so my mom sadly passed away, like right as I started, right before this record kind of came to fruition. So I had to write a song on there for her, obviously. That was about a trip we took to Arizona when she first got sick. Because when I lived out there, she had never gotten to visit me out there. So I took her and her husband out there on a trip, and it was great because you know she got to see the Grand Canyon, and it was a very uh, great bonding trip for us.
It's
Um,
beautiful.
yeah, it was pretty. I'm glad I got to do that. But yeah, a lot of the songs were. So this record is songs that I kind of wanted to put to bed. A lot of these songs that I've been working on for years,
Mhm.
and I'm very proud of them. I love them, but I was like, all right, I need to get these down, whether it be on tape or whatever, and just kind of let them go. Not that I would never play them again live or anything,
Right.
but just to kind of move on to something new.
Right. You'll stop
Um,
working on them essentially because I know for my
exactly.
my album that my drinking song for children album coming next year, half of it was recorded in the late 2000s, half of it was recorded in the past year or so. And one of the songs, the first verse is from like 2006, and the second one is from last year. And
Right.
it's like I kind of played with that idea, but like at a certain point, you're like, okay, this just has to be what it is and get out there, and then I can move on to something else. Because the second album is always different than the first album.
Yeah. I mean, that song on my record, Smiling Tyrants, the first verse I wrote, it took like 5 minutes to write, and I wrote it in 2004. And then I never wrote another verse until
Yeah.
like 15 years later almost.
That's
And I
something
finally
that comes
finished.
up a lot on this podcast is people's relationship with their old work. Whereas I'm one of those people who I just found this old notebook of mine from back in the day, and
Oh, nice.
there's tons of stuff in here that I
Yeah.
probably might go into a song that I record this week. And
Right.
I have always been like, looking back on my old stuff is an ability to is the opportunity to access a version of me that kind of no longer exists, but it's still
Exactly.
it's true to who I am and who I was. But a lot of people are so like, oh, I don't want people to hear the flaws. I don't want people to hear this and that.
All
But I'm
right.
like, how do you obviously you use old stuff, but do you have any feelings like that about your old work? And
Yeah, I struggle with that. Like, some of the songs, I had more songs that could have made the record, but because I was getting vinyl pressed, like there are literal physical limitations to how many songs can be on a vinyl record.
I
So it
was
was like, all right,
shaving stuff off the
yeah,
everything to try to get my album
right.
if I want to get a vinyl down. I know exactly what you're talking about. And then try to
Yeah, it's like,
plan so where is not only is the album short enough, but the songs have to be cut off in the right way so that each
right,
side is short enough, you know?
exactly. So, and that's the same when you record the tape. So like a tape reel, a 2-inch tape
Right.
reel is like 15 minutes worth of music.
That's
So
it, huh?
yeah. So
Wow.
I mean, you can fit a lot of tracks on there, but you have to. Luckily, I had demo versions of all these songs, so I knew roughly how long they were. So we had to, like, you literally have to sit down and think, all right, how are we going to sequence this just on the tape reels when we record it, so we know we have enough room? Because, like I said, tape is expensive. I think 2-inch tape now is like $300 a roll
Wait a minute, for 15
or a
minutes?
reel. Yeah.
So it's wait a minute. 'Cause I forgot to ask you before. So for like 15 minutes of 2-inch tape, it's like $300.
Yeah, a reel of 2-inch tape is around
Wow.
$300. So like if you're going to do 45 minutes, that's 3 rolls of or
Right.
3 reels.
That's like $1,000 once you start including
Yeah,
the shipping and the taxes and all that stuff.
right. So and finding people that still manufacture 2-inch reels, you know,
Right, right,
is the other thing. So, but yeah, so like as far as like my old stuff, like I said, some of these songs are old, um, and even some of them that aren't quite as relevant to me anymore. I was debating like, but like you said, it's like, well, that still was my life. Like that's
right.
still, and so I didn't get too hung up on that, because if a song's a good song, um, whether it's still relevant in the artist's life or not, uh,
Right,
shouldn't
because
bear too
eventually
much.
old becomes timeless.
Right.
If it's good, if it's old and it's good, then it's timeless. So that's sort of
Yeah.
there was a part of me that I'm like, I still like this. I mean, because especially if you have some stuff that you can say you used to do that is objectively terrible. Because I have
Right.
some of that stuff too. Like,
Right.
okay,
Oh,
well, I can
sure.
tell
Yeah.
the difference,
Yeah.
So the stuff that lasts obviously lasts for a reason.
Right. I know there's a band called Best Coast, and
Yes. Love
they
them.
they have a big song called Boyfriend that was on their first album, and I've seen them 3 times now, and every time before they play that song, Beth, the singer, says, "I hate the song. It no longer pertains to me, but I know you guys love it, so we're gonna play it."
Yeah.
So, like, it just goes that way.
I saw
But,
Radiohead once and they played Creep and I felt lucky.
wow.
Yeah. At
Yeah.
least I think they
Um,
do. Maybe my memory might have just crammed that in
well, I
there.
know they'll play it. They'll break it out every once in a while.
I saw the
But,
only time I saw them was the day before I left for college, and it was on the OK Computer tour in '97.
oh,
They played at
wow.
Harbor Lights. I think the Dandy Warhols opened too.
Oh, sure, that sounds about right.
Yeah. And I don't even think I'd heard OK Computer at the time, but it was an amazing. I had a great poster for that show that disappeared somewhere, unfortunately, but
Oh, yeah.
is what it is.
Uh, but yeah, so this record was just, yeah, it was good to get it done. Um, there was like 2 things on my checklist around that same time, and one was to do a 3-week trip to Australia, and one was to record this album, and I got them both done within, like, a year of each other, so I was like, "Alright, those 2 goals are off the checklist."
Did you get
So,
to Australia before the pandemic?
yes,
Okay, because
I
I
was there
know
in
I have friends that live
2019.
out there, and they've had a lot of trouble getting home and seeing family and things like that.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's yeah.
Yeah, I got in there, like, a year yeah, it was exactly a year before the pandemic hit, so I lucked out. Although, to be honest, if I got stuck there, I wouldn't have minded.
No, I know. I haven't been there, but it's one of those places that I'd love to. If I can handle the plane trip, I would love to,
Yeah,
go visit there
you
someday.
can't hate plans if you're gonna go there,
And they love. And there's
but
a lot of a great music down there, and they love a
oh,
lot of
yeah.
American music. Like I mentioned before, the Lemonheads. They've always been really big down there, and they're
Mhm.
one of my favorite bands of all time. You know.
Well, I will say if you get there and you get to Melbourne, they have great record stores in Melbourne. Like,
Oh,
I
yeah.
found an original pressing of Balloon Mind State there that I would never have found here.
Oh, the De La Soul album.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, those are all coming back. They're well, I don't know if that
I
one will.
know.
Yeah, and I
That's
didn't buy the
amazing.
3 Feet High and Rising one. It's already sold out, but I'm like, I
Oh,
can't
they'll
buy
get it
everything.
repressed.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I figured that now that they're pressing those De La Soul albums, they're probably never going
Yeah.
to stop pressing them.
Well, and that's the thing too. Right now, vinyl pressing is in such high demand, and I don't know if you heard one of the major vinyl pressing plants burnt down.
Really?
Yeah, so that set everything back with vinyl getting pressed in a lot of places. But they are opening a new vinyl pressing plant in California, I think I read, and so that'll help ease. And Jack White, he's opened at least one pressing plant, maybe 2 now. So as a fellow vinyl head, I appreciate that. But
I've turned into in the past year or so one of those people who is like things sound better on vinyl. I want the experience of listening to the whole album. And then the third thing for that is I need, as somebody who sits at my desk a lot of the day at work, I need an excuse to get up every 22 minutes. And
right,
vinyl gives me that. And
sure,
I don't know. I never thought I had to struggle my turn. I have the same turntables that I used back when I used to do a little DJ. I bought like the state of the art rave turntables like 22 years
yeah,
ago, and they're great, but they're too much muscle for me, and it's like there's
right,
too many things that and I had to strip it all down and make it simple so I don't get all this humming
right.
sound. But there's just something about listening to something on vinyl, and it's a different experience. It's
Well, and
you
that's the
know
thing too. Again, people. they kind of poo-poo vinyl listening and think it's like, oh, you're a snob or whatever. And that's not why I listen to vinyl. It's for the experience of it. It forces you to kind of pay more attention
Right.
to the music and, like you said, get up, flip the side. But you know, like when I was a kid, I look at the jacket, you look at the inserts, like,
Yeah. It's a more
obviously I wish it,
delicate process because I think
yeah.
it's like, your phone, it just seemed you I remember I was listening to like a Little Kim album on vinyl about a month ago. And for
Hmm.
some reason it just struck me that every inch of this album was blood, sweat, and tears. And I
Right,
thought about that in a way that I probably wouldn't think about if it was just streaming from my phone and I could turn it off or on wherever I wanted. It's just
right.
you feel the effort more a little bit, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's a more, uh, like I said, tangible experience,
Yeah.
which I think everyone could use a little bit more of with everything being instantly accessible and, streamable. And the other thing, as an artist, um, if you want to support an artist, like if they have vinyl, I try to buy the vinyl because, especially smaller artists, because that's just going to be likely the only way they make money,
Yep.
as far as selling their music. Obviously touring stuff and merch. But yeah, like if I see, a local artist that I like that's selling vinyl, I always buy the vinyl.
Me too. I actually
Um,
just picked up a couple too, and I haven't listened to these yet, but I'll recommend them. Two of my friends from my old hip hop group, Judge D, Rough
oh,
Edges. I
nice.
just picked this up, and then Oblivious and Cracks Hislack, Sedimentary Rose.
Oh, nice.
I've heard the albums, haven't played them on vinyl yet. One thing that I do a lot though is that like, so for me, a vinyl becomes an event, and like I don't want to press play these records until I know I'm going to have the time to listen to them, because I don't
Oh,
want to just
sure.
put them
Yeah.
on and then have it end and not
No,
really
no,
feel like I
no.
listened to it,
Yeah.
because like you don't want to waste that first listen. And
Right.
I don't know, you're buying yourself an experience, which I think is really cool. And if you
Yeah.
love the music that much, do you have any memories? So you mentioned your dad and the influence he had in his music. Were there records from his collection that really take you back to childhood? Because
Oh, absolutely.
for me, as odd as it is, it was Huey Lewis and the News Sport was the one that got
Sure.
played and played and played, and that's the
Yeah.
one that kind of stuck with me. My dad was a big Clapton fan, and I don't like a lot of Clapton solo stuff, but I love like Cream and things like
Yeah.
that.
My dad too loves Cream.
Yeah, yeah. And so, what were some of the records that really woke your eyes to music when you were at a young age?
So, for my parents, um, my mother, oddly enough, was a huge Journey fan. She loved Journey. And
I just found, oddly enough, to not interrupt you, but I didn't realize I have all my old Atari games on the wall. There was a
yeah, yeah.
Journey Atari game called
Oh,
Journey
for
Attack,
real?
and I had it for years, and I didn't know who Journey was back then. But I was only recently, I'm like, oh, this. And I found the booklet for it that I still have. I'm like, this is the band Journey had an Atari
Yeah,
game
yeah.
with everything running from fans. But yeah, Journey.
Right. So that was a more than the music actually was the jacket of their album Escape that is visceral to me because I don't know if you remember the jacket of the cover was like a scarab breaking out of this like crystal
Yep.
ball, but it was embossed. So I remember as a kid running my hand over the cover of that record
Yes.
and feeling the embossment of the so like I have that record still, just if only for that fact, like it brings me back to that. But yeah, like I said, Cream. My dad, because he played in a lot of cover bands, he introduced me to songs like I knew who Zeppelin was, and I liked them. I think I had Zeppelin 2 and Zeppelin 4 on cassette because 4 had Stairway and 2 had Whole Lot of Love. But he was playing in a band at the time that played Dancing Days, and
Oh,
I
I
was
haven't
just
heard that in a
watching
long
them.
time.
Yeah, I was watching them rehearse, and they played that song. I was like, "Oh, I love that song. Who's that?" And he's like, "That's Led Zeppelin." I'm like, "It is?" Because I didn't, like
Yeah.
so. And he played like, you know, they did a lot of Rascals songs. Like he loved the Rascals and the Young Rascals. So that record, the cover of their greatest hits, it kind of looks like a Liechtenstein painting. It's all like kind of dots.
Yep.
That record I remember looking at as a kid, and then my brother, like I said, like he had a bunch of the Van Halen stuff, like Diver Down, the first Van Halen record, and I remember him and my mom fighting about AC/DC because she got caught up in the Christian hate of AC/DC, thinking it stood for I think they thought it stood for like against Christ, devil's children, or something like that. So she was giving them hell for that. But so I remember those arguments when I was a kid. But
Do you think do
the
kids still have those arguments? Because I feel like I had to
I don't think
defend
so.
stuff at a young age that didn't feel like you. I don't know. It was just everybody thought music was gonna rot your brain, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you know, I don't. I
Well,
go
the
back to
PMRC was big then. The
oh
whole
yeah,
Tipper
Tipper
Gore
Gore.
and all that
Yeah,
stuff.
I always go back to for me the Rodney King tape was a huge influential
Oh
moment
yeah,
in my life, and I was
absolutely.
really big into Ice-T and Body Count, and they put
Yep,
out that Cop Killer song that I was listening to the
yep.
other day. It still holds up. But like I remember he was saying in the interview, I think that Jello Biafra from the Dead Kennedys did with him and Rolling Stone not long after that. And he said something about how like there's nothing in that song that's as horrible as what those cops were laughing about on the radio
Exactly.
after, and like
Right.
that quote stuck with me for years, and you're like that is just, it's like the idea that we can somehow compare what someone says on a record to like the near death beating of a
Right.
man for no reason on the side of the road is just insane, but that's what happened back then.
Well, and that's like the argument people make. Like, you know, God forbid that someone see a bare bottom on TV or
I
something
know,
like that,
or
but you can
Instagram,
see like someone getting shot like in a movie 100
right,
times or whatever, and that's fine for network TV. But it's that's saying like music like that was back then. They were talking about like music makes kids kill people and stuff. You play records
right.
backwards and all that nonsense, and it's like,
Yeah, it's that was nuts.
yeah, it's hard to believe nowadays that that was. And I'm sure there's still pockets of that going on, but
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean,
um,
we do live in a very liberal part of the country.
yeah,
I'm sure there's somewhere, someplace somewhere somebody's starting up a steamroller right now to go over
oh
like
yeah,
a
yeah,
pile of CDs, and to what
right.
end? I don't know.
But like for my musical journey, like I feel like I was lucky in the first pieces of media I owned. Like the first tape I ever owned was Run DMC Raising Hell.
That's a good start. Yeah, mine was
Yeah,
Thriller.
like oh well, that's I mean that's an iconic album.
Yeah.
Um, but and then like the first CD I got was the Low End Theory.
Oh, nice. That was one of my
So
first two. My very first CD was Totally Crossed Out by Chris Cross. And
sure.
my second one was the second Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch album, not the Good Vibrations one,
Ah,
another one. And then it was MC Brains. So yeah, I my CD career
wow.
didn't start out so hot, but that Chris Cross album still rocks.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, they had great producers. Was Dallas Austin involved in them?
I think he was, and Jermaine Dupri was very
Yeah.
involved in that. And I think I actually heard recently that Tretch from Naughty by Nature might have written some of the raps on that album. Because I think he and
Oh,
Jermaine Dupri
yeah.
had a falling out for years. And I think it might have been around some of that stuff. Which Tretch is
Yeah.
one of the most underrated MCs of
Oh,
all time.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
So you mentioned Raising Hell. Well, did you? I know for me, we grew up in the same area. I felt like I was the only person listening to rap music, really, or one of the few people willing to admit. And obviously, you and I know each other. We didn't know each other that well back then, and it was a
Yeah, yeah.
small school. But we probably weren't talking music or anything. We might have had like art class or something together. I don't even remember.
Right.
But what was hip hop a huge influence on you? Because my first album was Thriller. My second album was Beastie Boys' License to Ill, and then He's the
Right.
Rapper, I'm the DJ by Jazz Jeff
Oh,
and the
sure.
Fresh Prince, and those all hold up. So
Oh, well, and Jazzy Jeff is still a legend. I mean, that
an
dude is.
absolute legend. I tried to get him in my album, and I did not get a response. But
Well,
I think his
I'm sure
wife's
he's
his
a hard get.
manager. I sent her a
Oh,
couple
yeah.
emails, but never got anywhere. So
Yeah, I mean, you'd never know it listening to my record. But yeah, hip hop was a huge influence and still is a huge influence on what I do. Like, I kind of really latched on to the early 90s hip hop scene, like Native Tongues, Tribe Called Quest, De La, um,
Black Sheep, Jungle Brothers, all that good
Black
stuff.
Sheep, Jungle Brothers. And then, like, I worked at General Cinema then.
Oh
Uh,
yes,
so I worked with a guy there that I'm still friends with. He introduced me to a lot of stuff like the Artifacts, which their first record is still like top five hip hop albums for
yeah,
me ever. I love that record. But just the production and that stuff. Obviously, I love the lyrics and the emceeing, but the stuff like the Uma and like even on to like Jay Dilla
Yes.
and that more atmospheric kind of stuff. An atmosphere actually,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Perfect. Yeah.
going into that stuff. Just the production on that stuff was just I I loved um, the Run DMC stuff and that early like LL Cool J, all the Def Jam stuff. But it just wasn't as intricate production and
Yeah,
kind of
they're still
interesting to
figuring it
me.
out. It was, they were still kind of figuring out what hip hop was because even in
Right,
like the early '90s, people like Run DMC almost felt like they were passe around that time.
right.
And they obviously weren't, and they can't. So people like LL Cool J, I think he was. I don't know where his career was before Mama Said Knock You Out. I know it would been big, but I think he'd been a little bit on the downtrend, and a
Well,
lot
there
of
was
those
always
guys.
rumors that he had like a ghostwriter on some of that stuff too.
Yeah,
I don't know if that was ever true, but
I don't know.
which whatever. I mean, I'm not
Yeah, I
again,
mean,
I'm not
Dr. Dre
throwing
didn't
shade
write.
for that.
It's weird when it comes to rap that some people want to be mad about that in some instances, but not
Yeah.
others. But like Dr. Dre didn't write a lot of his own lyrics and things like that.
Well, and no
It's
one got mad at Elvis for not writing any of his own
right, or
music.
Sinatra.
So yeah,
It's there's all then there's also the thing where it's like Taylor Swift writes all of her own songs, and I'm like, that's what you're supposed to be doing.
yeah.
Like, it's
Yeah,
like, don't
that's not
we're
like
giving credit for that yet? What do you want, a cookie?
right.
Like,
Yeah, exactly. Um, but yeah, I mean, you look at like, I mean, you're talking about Aerosmith, that Armageddon song. They didn't write that song.
oh yeah, that's a good point. There's probably 27 writers on that song or
No,
something.
that was what's her name? She's literally like a billionaire because she wrote that. She wrote My Heart Will Go On
Oh,
and like all these and the Brian Adams Robin Hood song.
oh,
She wrote that
Brian
song
Adams didn't
too.
write that song?
Mm.
Wow. It's
So she's literally that like I wish I could Diane Warren, that's her name.
oh yes, I know
She
that name. Yes,
yeah, she's literally like a billionaire from writing songs. So
those days are
um
over.
yeah. But yeah, I going back to like yeah, 90s hip hop. Especially like De La, like Posthumous, I put his lyrics up there with like someone like Bob Dylan. Like people revere Bob Dylan for his
Right.
poetry, and I feel like Posthumous is right up there. Like some of his like he has a line on Balloon Mind State. I forget the song, but it's I'm an early bird, but the feathers are black, so the apples that I catch are usually all worms. Like that line is unreal to me.
Yes, it
Like
has to be.
um, so I always appreciated that and the sampling. They did like unique jazz samples that you wouldn't know otherwise. Um,
They were
and that
taking a
in
lot of
turn is
risks because hip hop was
oh
not
yeah,
there when that happened. That
no,
wasn't,
not at
you
all.
know, there wasn't the pasty, the neon flowers. There's none of that stuff.
Right. Yeah. And then that kind of went into like the whole Raucous Records scene, which I loved.
Do you know how Raucous Records got started? Speaking of billionaires, that the guy who funded Raucous Records was Rupert Murdoch's son.
Oh, for real?
Yeah, and so that was started on Murdoch money.
Wow.
Yeah, that's one
That's
of
a
those
lot of
facts that
reconciling to
I
deal
know
with for those artists.
I've learned and forgotten that fact numerous times, and every time I relearn it, I'm like, oh my god.
Yeah.
Like,
Oof.
yeah, I know.
Well,
So sorry.
um, no. I said, like I said, that's I'm sure that's a lot harder for the actual artist than it is for me to reconcile that
Yeah.
tidbit. But yeah, I mean that stuff was great too. I mean, Mad Lib and his production's great, and I think some of the lyricists out of there, like Shaddam Sadiq and Pharoah Monch,
Oh
those
god, yeah.
guys are just
And it's funny you
awesome.
mentioned Bob Dylan. And I feel I say this to some people and they give me crap for it, but my favorite Bob Dylan album is Bringing It All Back Home. And the first half of that album sounds a lot like Subterranean Homesick Blues sounds like a rap song, and Maggie's Farm
Right.
sounds like a rap song, and
Yep.
Bob Dylan's 115th Daydream. He's essentially rapping,
Hmm. Yep.
and it sounds dope. Like you can see
Right.
why the Beastie Boys sampled them in the
Right.
90s and probably got sued for it, but
Yeah. Well, um, but even that, I mean, it's a horrible rap, but you have that Blondie song where she raps.
Yeah, Rapper's
Yeah.
Delight. Fab Five ready. Is
Yeah,
it?
yeah. But she also was part of that scene. I mean, hip hop and punk were like
Right.
they were hand in hand at that time because they were so on the outskirts of everything else. They kind of bonded. I think a lot of those groups bonded over being the outcasts from like mainstream music.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned
So,
that. I'm actually the next interview I'm doing for the podcast is about Basquiat, and I just watched a
oh, nice.
documentary on him the other day. And there was Deborah Harry, there was Fab
Yep,
Five Freddy, there
yep,
was who's the other one? Just Thurston Moore was in it, and it just
sure.
reminded you how these were. You take a group like Bad Brains, who was a black punk band. It's like
Yep,
that was sort of like those groups really did have a big cross section there, and I think
right,
a lot of people think of punk as angry music, and probably sometimes go to the far of thinking it's almost skinhead music,
right,
which for the most part it's not. It's very accepting. It's that idea of
right,
like we can all do this. It's the energy you bring to it, and that is a lot of
right.
hip hop in it as well.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I loved about Operation Ivy. Going back to them is they were all about unity. They had a song called Unity,
Yep.
and it was talking about that stuff because you know, like a lot of genres of anything, when you get extremists, and yeah, there were skinhead punk groups, they're going to get some press because
Right.
it's shocking and all that. But to have all the other bands lumped in with that is just ridiculous.
And it's like they always wanted to. It's like I mean George Carlin had a bit about they're always looking for ways to divide you, and they don't.
Oh yeah,
It's like there's all these things that we have in common that really bring us together, but the media seems to always want to be there to sort of spread you apart. There's never
right,
a story on like, hey, we're at a punk show and look at how well these people are getting along and
right,
different
right,
races.
right.
It's always like,
Yeah,
oh, so and so did this, and then this happened,
right.
and now we're banning everybody.
Yeah,
You know. So what about upcoming music for you? You working on a new album, or what do you got in the works?
yeah. So I'm working on once this record was done, I kind of shifted to like because this record is again it's songs I wrote, so I'm not going to say it's not what I want to do, but the stuff I gravitate more towards is more atmospheric. Like you and Lee were talking about Tycho. Um, I love that music, and my guitar playing going back to the Sundays, I feel like fits that style more than like a traditional rock kind of vibe.
Mm.
So yeah, like I've been working on a bunch of I hate to call it electronic because like I'm using guitars and
Right.
the drums. I'm not playing drums, but the drums I'm using are more like uh, conventional kits, not like electronic drum
Yeah,
kits.
it's like the beeps and boops. It's the because you can get
Yeah,
pretty. That's the thing about like virtual drum machines now.
yeah.
You can get some pretty amazing sounds out of them.
Oh, absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, the IRs they use now are just they record real drums and um, but yeah. So I'm using a lot more like synths and keys and stuff for kind of more ambient washes and things of that nature. And again, I love to collaborate. Like this stuff is all instrumental right now, but that's I want it like tend to gravitate towards female singers. Like all my favorite
Same with
singers
me.
tend to like
Yep.
Sade,
Oh, shit.
Estero.
Yeah.
Um,
For me,
there's a
it's
band
Karen
out.
Carpenter, which people always laugh at me about. I'm a huge
Oh,
Carpenters fan.
she's amazing, and I'm sure you've seen that clip that's been going around of her doing that drum solo on like some. I mean, she was amazing.
Yeah.
But
I
yeah,
name
I just
checked her in my most. I wrote a verse about drums for my song Seinfeld that's out now, and the
oh
last
yeah, yeah,
line is something about a muse, and basically I'm in love with the ghost of Karen Carpenter, which is
sure,
absolutely true.
yeah. Um, but yeah, stuff like that. I'd love to get a female voice on there for some of these tracks. Um, but yeah, like that's kind of what I'm focusing on right now. Um, I mean, I know you follow my Instagram, so I'll every once in a while I'll post a pedal board picture, and it's just like people are like that's a lot of knobs, and a lot of buttons, but um, there's a rhyme and a reason, despite
Yeah.
what it may look like. But you know, I'm not a purist when it comes to guitar either. Like I I'm not afraid to make the guitar not sound like a guitar.
Right.
It just happens to be the instrument I'm most comfortable with. But if I
Yeah.
can get similar sounds of like a synth or something else by using the guitar, I'm going to do that just because it's easier for me to play that.
Yep.
I'm not a good enough keyboard player to play some of the things I want to come through a keyboard. But there's a synthesizer that came out almost 25 years ago now called a microchord.
Oh, I got one right here.
Yeah.
Is that
So
that's this
that's the
thing, right?
one.
Yep.
Yep. And I bought that when they first came out, and they still make them because it's legendary. The sounds in
Yes,
that
they're
thing.
awesome.
That thing, as far as gear, that might be one of the most influential things on my art. Like when I got that, I was living with three Tufts vet students, and I had the attic room, and I had my little recording. I was recording to an 8-track that recorded the zip discs. That's how long ago this was, kids.
Yeah, good lord.
Um, but yeah, I was more inspired by that little synthesizer than almost anything I've ever had gear wise. And I just would go up there in Woodshed and write all these. And I still have the songs. I'd love to redo them just to make them a little, not necessarily change the songs themselves, but just like record them better. Like
Yep.
with now that the technology is caught up, I could just feel like they would sound a lot better if I re-recorded some of that stuff with the
Yeah.
software I have now. But yeah, that's kind of the stuff I'm doing now. Is more like ambient, like the stuff we collaborate. Like again, I love hip hop, so I'd love to do like more hip hop stuff. Um, Obviously not rap, but just like do beats and stuff like that. I've
Yeah.
done stuff like that in the past, and
I
um,
I it's funny, I used to be really into making beats, but and I still enjoy it, but I have a hard time making when I make beats, I always go too far and it becomes something that's very hard to rap over. And I realize
right,
that I think I'm better when I use beats that other people have either collaborated with me on or made completely themselves.
sure,
I can't tie up the bow on it. I don't know. Most of my songs in my album are ones that were co-produced by somebody else. I think Craig Cameron plays guitar in a couple of
oh
them,
nice.
and yeah, there was so long ago. It was I think he recorded all those parts in like 2006 or something. So
Oh, he's a great guitar player though.
yeah,
So
yes, definitely. It's funny to talk about the purists because I had my man Aztec on here recently, and we're talking about early 2000s hip hop, and we were talking about how there's so many people who was like, yo, we're bringing it back to 94, we're bringing it back to
right,
92.
right, right,
And I'm just like, well, there's still tons of records from 94, 92 that I haven't heard yet. And if I had a
right,
choice between listening to something made now that sound like that or something like that that I haven't heard yet, I'm gonna pick
right,
that. And some people really get caught up in the past of like, oh no, 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 oh no, no. I lost my virginity in 1994. So all music
right,
achieved perfection then. That's just a
right,
known
right. Yeah.
fact. And I don't know.
That's the same with SNL, Saturday Night
Yo,
Live. People
yes.
always think the cast that was there when they were in high school was the best cast ever. Like,
Right. Even though at
and
the
it's just
time they were probably saying how bad it was.
exactly. And like, yeah, it drives me crazy when I'm like on these online forums and stuff, and people are like, "There's no good music being made today." I'm like, "There's so much good
It was
music."
more than
Like,
ever. Everybody
yeah,
can make it.
yeah. It's harder to sift through, I guess, because you don't have like three radio stations or whatever. And back in the day, radio stations weren't formatted, so they would play like Marvin Gaye and then Led Zeppelin and then like the Carpenters and then Black Sabbath. Like now it's more formatted, but for all of its evils that streaming brings, and I definitely have issues with it monetarily, the way they compensate artists, but
Right.
it is good that like I wouldn't have known a Cannons if it wasn't for my fiance. She's the one who introduced me to them because she was listening to something else and they suggested Cannons, and
Yeah.
she played it for me, and I was like, I love this band, like, and
Yeah.
they're one of my favorite bands now. So,
Yeah.
and that
It's
could happen before, but it was more word of mouth,
right.
you
It's
know.
it's it was harder, and the thing with streaming that I remind myself is that, okay, if more and more people can make music, that means there's more and more music in the world. And as with anything in the world, the more of there is, the less value there is to it.
Right.
And it's like that's essential. That's and so, but to bring it full all the way around is there was a time when people were like, "Oh, I'm going to become a rapper and get rich, or I'm going to join a band and get
Right.
rich." And I don't think that they maybe see a little bit with rap, but I think a lot of people are realizing that this is not a pathway to get rich. It's like
No, not anymore.
it's become more like, oh, people who write novels and knowing they're not going to make money off of it. There's so much
Right.
overhead involved, and it's really
Right.
hard. People are doing because they love to do it now, or because they just want the attention. I don't know. But
Right. Well, even someone like Paul McCartney, like obviously that guy doesn't need the money.
no,
Like he does it because he loves it.
yeah,
Like, and he still puts out new music. Like, whether you like that new music or not, that's beside the point. The fact that he still works on new music and he's, willing to keep creating is speaks volumes. He could have packed it in
oh
40
yeah,
years ago,
yeah,
like so. I mean, even like someone like the Rolling Stones, they're not like my favorite band, and people are like they should pack it in, but it's like, well, they love doing what they do, so
and what are they gonna do? Eat too? It's like you don't. It's like I think you see in just day to day life that a lot of people retire and they don't know how to spend their time. And it's like you'll
right,
see someone like I don't want to pick on like Charles Barkley, but he's not the
yeah,
same shape he was when he was
right,
in it was just like you change your entire life that drastically, it can have a major impact on yourself
absolutely,
negatively. And I think they probably, I don't know how much Mick and Keith even talk to each other. I believe I read in
right,
Keith's memoir that they haven't been in the same dressing room together in like 20, probably
yeah.
30,
See,
40 years.
exactly. So
But that's the thing too of being in a group is it's being in a group is sort of like being in a relationship with multiple people mixed
right,
with like being assigned like a group project at work or at school,
hmm,
because it's really, really, really hard to have a good working relationship with anybody on anything, and
oh,
also a good
absolutely,
friendship, and have it not get in the way. And then when you spend all your time together, then there's different personal influences like
all
drugs or
right.
people interested in dating that come in. It's
Hmm.
really, really hard to do that. It's
Oh yeah, being in a band is. I mean, even when I was in Nimmer, like we were constantly bickering about silly stuff. Like
yeah.
what should we call this EP, or like what should the flyers for the show look like, or it's even the band name. Like
Yeah.
people were always asking us what it meant and stuff like that, but you know, was it the best name? I don't know, but it was there before I was even in the band, so I was just like, well, what? That's the name. Like, what am
I
I
like
gonna
it.
do? Yeah, I mean, I was fine with it. I was kind of ambivalent about it actually, but the fun thing with that name was whenever someone would ask us about it, we'd always make up a different story of what it
Yeah.
was. Um, but you know, band dynamic. Again, like my fiance would say when I was still trying to like get a band going, and you'd be like talking to people online or whatever. She's like, "This is like dating." Like
It
the
is.
questions you
Yeah.
ask and stuff, and I'm like, it is like it kind of is like dating. Like you're trying to get a sense of what the person is into and like what their goals are. It's a funny comparison, but it kind of rings true.
This podcast kind of like that too because I've been dating someone for a little while now, but I used to go on tons of like Bumble and Tinder and all
Right,
these
right.
dates. And in the first date, like the first 10 minutes before it started, before I met up with the person, my brain would be going, "Why are you here? You can just go home. Wait, why?" It's like you feel nervous for no reason. You're just like, I could just leave. This is like what,
Right.
and like and then the podcast for me is kind of the same way because it's like 5 or 10 minutes before every episode. I'm like, why am I even doing this? Like, I could be watching
Right.
TV. And then once you start, it's a whole different thing. But
Right, right.
there is something about the forcing yourself to do it, but then it blows up. I don't know. I don't know if I could ever see myself being in a real band again. Like the idea of I pretty much quit. I was in a group with three dudes years ago, Mike Monarchy, and the idea of like going on the road to me was like, no, I don't
Oh
want
yeah.
to like this sounds
Oh, that's
horrible.
a whole different animal too.
Yeah.
Like
Ugh, good lord.
sharing a small van or whatever, and
Yeah.
just making hardly any money, just enough to like fill the tank and maybe sell a T-shirt or two. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's that's why you gotta love it. Like
Yeah.
people like that still, especially this day and age where it's so hard to make a living. I got nothing but respect for people that still like put in that work, like touring in a van. Like again, that's why whenever I go to a show and it's a smaller act, I try to buy some sort of merch, whether it's a record or a T-shirt, just because I know like what that entails.
Yeah.
You know, trying to get the shows in snowstorms and stuff. Like,
Oh my God. It's
I
just,
mean, I did that when I was in Arizona. I played in a few bands, and there was a few bands I played in because Arizona is such a big state. Even if you're just playing in the state, you could have like a 2 hour drive to a gig, or sometimes a 5 hour drive to a gig. Um, so, like, I understand on a smaller scale what that can be like, but yeah, hats off to those people that still really are
yeah.
trying to do that
Still
because it
crisscrossing the
is tough.
globe. Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm very much studio. I want to do things at home. I'd rather
Right,
spend the time making a video or something than I would going out on the
right.
road. But like, I got up on stage with the Drake and at an MF Doom tribute show a few months ago,
Oh,
and I
nice.
spit for the first time in forever, and I was like, oh, yeah, this feels good. Like you hear the crowd reaction, and you're like, all right, well, this is why you do this, you know.
Right, right.
Uh,
Did you go to the Jizza show?
You know what? I didn't. I tried to get, so I was gonna go, and I kept putting off getting tickets because I was just like COVID, blah blah blah.
Right,
And then
right.
eventually, I'm like, I'm gonna go, and it was sold out, and I was like pissed. But then I saw that it was gonna be -7 degrees with wind
Yeah,
chill
yeah,
that night, and I
it was
was like,
brutal.
because I just
Yeah.
wouldn't have gone if it was that cold. I'm just too much of a wuss. But
Yeah,
you
it's
could spend,
brutal.
if you wanted, you could pay $250 to play them in chess beforehand.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So I don't know if I would have. I actually know I wouldn't have done that. But
I mean, I still the Jizza and the RZA, scene and coffee and cigarettes is still one of the best things ever.
yes. It's like, you just quit drinking all that caffeine, Bill Murray.
Gargle with hydrogen peroxide.
Yeah.
Don't
Wasn't there
swallow it.
another, yeah, there was another scene of that movie. Was it Iggy Pop and Tom Waits talking to each other?
Yeah, there was some great scenes. I mean, that whole movie is great, but yeah, there was that one, and then there's the Kate Blanchett one she does with herself is phenomenal.
Yes. Yes. I was trying to think what that one was. The Iggy Pop and Tom Waits one amused me because Iggy Pop is he's such a personality on his own. And that
Yeah,
whole scene was him trying to like, he was almost on his heels trying to talk to Tom Waits because he's almost being out weirded by somebody. He didn't really know
right,
how to
right,
handle it.
exactly.
I thought that
Yeah,
was really cool.
yeah.
But
Tom Waits, he can up the weird game for
yeah, yeah, yeah. So
sure.
I don't know. Like we've been any closing thoughts or anything? We've been going for a little while. I just looked down at the clock.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, no, this is great. I appreciate what you're doing with this pod. I think it's important for like, it's good for other artists to hear artists talk about kind of their process and what inspires them and like, you know, just briefly, I never thought I'd be writing songs when I first started playing guitar.
Right.
And oddly enough, the Sarah McLachlan album, Fumbling Towards Ecstasy,
Yes,
I
you
heard that
mentioned
record,
that.
which is such an amazing record. And I don't know what I thought about myself at the time to think I could ever create something in that realm, but that was the record that inspired me to like start writing my own stuff. And I was lucky enough to meet her, Leah, actually, and I saw her
Really?
do a solo show, and we met her after the show, and I got the chance to tell her that, which was kind of great. Like, I mean, she's just an amazing artist, but she was as nice as you would think. I mean,
That's
um,
wonderful when that happens. Because I've had that go both ways, where the person you meet is
right,
super nice, and then there other people are not.
right. But yeah, no, I think, just any artist out there, even if you're not making a living at it, just like keep doing it. Like it's something to. There can never be too much art in this world. Is
Very true.
my feelings on it, and yeah, just
you mentioned Sarah McLachlan. This triggered something in my head. I had totally forgot about this story for a long time, but this isn't related to her, but maybe think of Tori Amos. And there
Oh,
was this
sure.
time, probably in the early 2000s, where I had gotten super drunk. We were in Boston, and I was with one of my female friends at the time, and I ended up crashing at her place in her roommate's room. And but when I woke up the next morning, I'd never been in the apartment before, and I didn't know where I was. And I look around and I see all these photos of like not like from a magazine, but photo like snapshots of Tori Amos. And
Wow.
I was like, "Am I in Tori Amos's room?" And then I realized that the guy whose room I was staying in was good friends with Tori Amos.
Oh,
And
wow.
so but for the first like minute, I'm like, "Wait, what did I do last night?"
Yeah.
So,
Right.
but that Sarah
Oh,
McLachlan, that was a huge album back then. And I mean,
oh
it's
yeah.
still amazing now. It's hard not to think about the dogs on the commercials
Yeah.
when you think of her, but like,
Which she has, like, when we saw her before she played that song, she made a comment. She, made a funny comment about like, I know this song makes a lot of people cry, but that was never my intention. But
uh,
she was a great sport about that. So
well, they still
she's
get my
Canadian.
$20 a month from
Oh,
the
absolutely, yeah.
because of that song probably. Well, you were saying she's a what?
She's Canadian, so she's got a good sense of humor. I think that's kind of intrinsic in most Canadians. So,
Yeah. Funny you mentioned
um,
that. My girlfriend's parents are on a cruise this summer, and Shania Twain was on the cruise, like not like performing, but as like, just a
no, really,
regular person. And she's like, but she got up there and she performed, and she was
wow,
super sweet and super funny and super nice and super talented. And you're like, well, that's the Canadian part.
yeah,
So not like us
um,
asshole American.
yeah, right.
Cool,
But
man.
no, yeah, this is great. Thanks for getting me on here, and it was a privilege to get on here and talk to you.
No, it's great talking to you too, man. I really appreciate it. So maybe we'll get you on again at some point. I've got some more stuff to promote. Hopefully, I'm gonna
Yeah,
keep
yeah,
doing this thing
absolutely.
for a while to come. So it'll be great to have you on again.
And microwave sushi. Look for
Yes,
that.
hopefully. I'm working on it. It's one of my numerous projects, but I don't know. I can already hear it. And the thing is, I'm thinking I sent you with one of the songs that I recorded the rap over, and the next day I was like, just ignore that.
Yeah, I remember.
And and like now I was like, I tried to do a very like normal rapping approach to that song, and afterwards I'm like, that's not the right take. I gotta try something totally different with my vocal approach on it. So now I have
Sure,
this new idea on it that I'm really excited about. So
cool. I
you
look
know, to
forward
share
to
it
it.
to you guys. So yeah, figure some time to jam. All right, man. Well, it's been a pleasure. Jason Temple, pick up the album, postcards and
Yeah,
and, and, and
yeah. Ephemera.
ephemera. Well, actually, no,
Oh,
we didn't talk about that. Yeah, let's talk
all
about the
right,
title because before we started, I asked you how to pronounce that, and that's been like an hour and 15 minutes. So I've already
right,
forgotten. But let's talk about the title a little
right.
bit.
Yeah, so that's not as pretentious as it sounds, like I was saying to you before. So, not to make it too sad, but so when my mom was sick in hospice, I was driving out to her place constantly. Um, and on the way, I was driving by this antique shop, and they had a sign in front of the store that said postcards and ephemera. And I was like, that'd be a great album name. Like, I think I had a name picked out for my record whenever it was going to get done. But the more I thought about it, and so the theme of the record cover, so I don't know if you're familiar with the WPA postcards. It
Sounds
was
familiar.
so WPA was an initiative. I think they did it in the 30s to promote the national parks,
Okay. Yep.
and they did all these iconic national parks posters that still like they do prints of and stuff. And I
I'm a big
always love
Smokey the
those.
Bear fan, so I've probably seen a
Yeah.
lot of those things too.
Oh, I'm sure you have. And like I always love those postcards. So so that's the theme of the cover. Um, so I actually that's from a photo I took of Bash Bish Falls, and then I hired a designer to kind of posterize it and make it look like those old
Yep.
postcards. But yeah, so I felt like the title fit the theme of that, and even like my logo for my record company
Yep.
is kind of that vibe too.
Yep.
Um,
Air,
but
our, I got my
Airline
glasses
Records.
on. Okay, go on my glasses so I can't.
So yeah, Airline Records is the label. But yeah, so that was kind of impetus for that title was like, it kind of fits the the visual theme of the record and
Yeah,
the song theme.
I would agree.
Um,
Yeah, definitely.
but yeah, like I got a Bandcamp. It's just Bandcamp slash Jason Temple, and I got an Instagram, Jason Temple Music. So,
Yeah, we'll
and
put
that
that on
has
the
a link
screen
to
the
my
whole time
Bandcamp.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, I got a link to my Bandcamp from that. And yeah, the it's all by the time this is airing, it'll all be on Spotify and all the streaming services too. So,
Awesome. Well, I
but
can't
yeah,
wait
thanks
to.
again, man.
Yeah, I can't wait to listen to some more, and I can't wait to share stuff we've been working on with people too. And
Yeah,
oh
absolutely.
man, it's been great to catch up.
All right, man.
All right, man. I'll talk to you.
Beneath the canopy of stars, past curtains of fireflies, mice hide in fecund fields, far from the owl's eyes. At the bend in the road, where you caught your stride, no troubles to follow you, no secrets left to hide. I was far behind, but I still could see petals beneath your feet. I never saw you so free. And if you kick up some dust, don't you worry about me. With a laugh from your youth, you split the summer air on your way to some peace, and I hope to meet you there. I was far behind, but I still could see the petals beneath your feet. I never saw you so free. If you kick up some dust, don't you worry about me. I hope you never lose the strength to spin those wheels away from agonies that nip at your heels. Watch for the open roads, clear days and starry skies, and may you always find